totally taking credit for somebody else's hard work on the intro. Thank you very much for the Gamers United Guild for allowing me the use of the Gamers United intro.
The use Where was of the your... Wait a minute, hold on.
RetroRoots little title on that.
Well, it
looked awesome.
The Geeks with Cash whole logo was on there.
Yes, it was.
So, wait a minute. What do you mean letting you use it? You're a member of the guild.
I know. I still appreciate being able to use it.
Well, I
can still be appreciative.
You can be. And you know what?
Judgmental.
I appreciate that because guess who made that bumper?
You?
Yes.
Nice. I liked it.
With the help of Graphic God, but yeah, that's mine. And that's so whenever we add people or people leave, I'm the one who changes it.
Yeah, we got to get Chuck in there.
Yeah, I'm gonna get Chuck in because I just got Chuck into the guild, so
yeah.
I will have the new bumper. I'm gonna try to work on that stuff tomorrow.
Just being in the guild come with dental. So we got a bunch of people in here tonight. We got HDK who popped in for a little bit. We got Ted
HDK.
We got Panda Sub. We got Gorge Games. We've got Phoenix is in here tonight.
Hello.
7 people in here. Not everybody's chatting, but we appreciate all the lurkers as well. If you guys feel the need to say anything or speak up in the conversation, feel free to speak up and contribute to the conversation. This is pretty much an open forum during the entirety of the podcast. Tonight, as you may know from looking at Mike Mullis, we're talking about Sega. Rise, fall, highs, lows, anything and everything in between. And we've already had a question posed by Panda Sub, which we will get to tonight, which I think I'm going to go ahead and make a banner for. So, how was your guys' weekend? What have you been doing? What do you think is going on this week? I know it's Monday. It's a little early to know what's going on in your week so far.
Go ahead, Rob.
Well, my week was good since actually my 2 weeks were good since this last episode. I went to the dump this weekend, so I guess that was my one productive thing to do before the season.
I feel like that's a weird thing to be excited about, but we're getting older. Maybe that's an exciting thing now. I don't know.
Well, it just I've been complaining about all the crap I've been tripping over in the garage, and my wife got tired of me complaining. So that was like our big, giant productive. We finally got off our asses and did it event this weekend, and so now there's this nice glorious hole in the garage that used to be filled with all kinds of shit.
It can now be filled with video games shit, right?
Yeah, well, just be filled up with different kinds of shit. So
God, I feel old on this podcast. Like we're all talking about getting stuff out of the garage, and we're like, yes.
It's kind of funny how similar we are. My wife ordered a large dumpster. It's arriving on Tuesday. My clean out starts this week.
Are you getting ready about any games or anything? Yeah, we'll take some stuff off your hands. Okay.
I saw that like
oh, you got to be faster than that.
Oh, you almost had it. Yes, I remember the commercial.
That's awesome, Rob.
Congratulations to having more space in your little corner of YouTube, because I know you pretty much strike your claim out there as far as what you can get done. The cat seems to own most of the house.
I had to kick him out of the game room so I can focus. So he's not happy about that. But screw him, he's a cat.
He says the same thing about you.
I'm not a cat.
He's just a human. Whatever.
All right, till he poops on your bed in the middle of the night.
That's right.
Well, that's my wife's problem. She goes before bed before I do. So, okay.
It's your problem if he poops on your side. You try to go to bed. So, how'd your weekend go, Mike? How you been?
My weekend was long and tiring, but very, very good. Actually, for the first time since June, maybe early July, I had a band gig.
Really? How'd that go?
It was awesome. It was a bar mitzvah, and it was It was actually quite excellent. So kids love. Man, I'm actually impressed now. Kids love older music, especially boys. Like girls like newer music, boys like older music. And so we spent a lot of time this weekend playing stuff from the 70s and 80s. And that's what they
Oh,
wanted.
you must have been in heaven.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I know you like playing that genre
Oh,
anyway.
yeah. Yeah, I can't stand the newer stuff. We have to do it because, well, people pay us. But, man, when I can rock through some 60s or 80s and the kids are dancing to all of it, I'm like, yeah, your parents raised you right. So
I feel like we have a terrible Sega podcast going around. Like everybody's talking about Nintendo and the Amico right now. We've got a Wii U and Amico conversation going on in chat right now.
Yeah,
thanks,
I'm trying
man.
to track this Wii U conversation.
Yeah. I'm thinking that the synopsis is that the Amico is pretty much going to take off where the Wii U left off, and that the Wii U could have been a great console. People had done more than just transpose their games over to it and not put in minimal effort.
True.
Yeah. Well, because Corge got to play the Amico at the Utah event. So that's
I was going to ask him about that, about how that went, because he said it was better after he got to go to the Amico Thanksgiving event. So that's kind of cool. More and more people are getting to play that, so that's a cool thing.
it's a good thing.
How's it going, Born? How you doing?
Cousin born. Cousin might give a mosh pit for the kids.
Because I might give a mosh pit for the kids. That's
Not
awesome.
that kind of band.
I don't know, man. I feel like you just ought to lean into it. I have been struggling this weekend to try to get things ramped up. I'm going to do, and I guess I'll announce it here because I didn't get the announcement video out today either, and I probably should have. I'm going to try to do a Ghostbusters month this month. So I have been struggling to come up with a new format because I thought I would do a couple of movie reviews this month on the Ghostbusters films and maybe add in the cartoon series, the real Ghostbusters cartoon series, not the extreme one, because I never watched that one as a kid. I thought I might be able to get those in, but as I started doing the review and started running, I was just trying to do it just like stream of consciousness and realized that I never need to do that again. It was bad. I watched it and went, nope. And we're writing things down now. So
Yeah. I find it hard to just rattle stuff off and actually have it end up looking like a coherent. I'm giving you an example right now.
I'm
not very good at
like
it.
that. Hi, Lady Foxfire. How's it going? Yeah, so I felt much the same way when I was trying to do it. I mean, it wasn't too bad, but there was things that I had out of order that I found myself going back to, which was going to lead to like circular logic and me stepping over my toes. And I'm like, I'm going to have to come up with a new way of doing this because I had this image of how I wanted it in my head and it just wasn't going that way. So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do that. I also spent this weekend spending a lot of time on the Ghostbusters Genesis game, which I'm still on the fence of. Am I going to do that in the can I learn vein, or am I going to do that more just like live stream it along with a couple of other games and hope I beat it this month? Because I was thinking about doing that, maybe some Luigi's Mansion, maybe some Diablo, kind of mix things up a little bit, kind of have, a mix of things that are, well, at least Luigi's Mansion and the Ghostbusters game, they're both kind of busting ghosts, right? So they're kind of in a similar vein. So it kind of keeps it on track there. So I thought that might be something fun to do this month that I've been trying to struggle with. I also saw the second Venom movie this weekend. I enjoyed
How
it.
was
The
that?
critics hated it. I thought it was fun. I had a good time with it.
Because
Alex Jennings is here and Silver Rod's here too.
Mm-hmm.
Hi guys.
I wasn't even aware that was out for one thing. Because I kind of liked the first one the first time I saw it, and then I took a terrible parent. I took my kids to go see it, but I took them one at a time. So when I took my second to go see it, I was like, this movie's kind of awful. And so as much as I was, because it's just the first one was just the novelty of actually seeing like a halfway decent Venom after Spider-Man 3.
Yeah.
And then once that wore off, I was like, Tom Hardy is awful in this movie. And this Venom sucks. I like the voice, and that was pretty much it.
You know what? I got a whole new appreciation for him after I found out who did the voice of Venom.
Well, I mean, that kind of makes sense. But I mean,
who was it?
Tom Hardy.
Yeah, he did both voices.
Oh,
Yeah.
So he would record the
makes
voices of
sense.
Venom in the morning, and then they would play it back when he was on scene so he could react to it like he was having a live conversation.
that is. That is hilarious.
Yeah.
Now, I would expect that. I would expect that the Venom 2 would be at least a little bit better because it was directed by what's his name, Gollum, and
Andy Serkis.
Yes, thank you.
Can
you confirm?
Was it?
What's that now?
Was it better?
Whoa.
All right, can I confirm
totally
whether or not
spaced.
Venom 2 was better? I didn't think it was. Sorry, I was trying to respond to Lance and listen to you guys at the same time. That does not work well. My brain doesn't function that way. I liked it. It was a good like monster clash movie, but I put it more in like a versus movie thing rather than really extending the arc because they didn't really build that much into Venom. They had some infighting between him and his host and that kind of thing. But I mean, the real big thing at the end was like the big clash between Carnage and Venom, which is what people paid money to see.
Yeah.
But it felt like it sort of slipped back a little bit more towards like, the good parts of like Alien versus Predator or the good parts of like, Kong versus Godzilla kind of thing where you're watching them just like bash the hell out of each other. Mm-hmm. And those parts were like really fun. The buildup they tried to do for Jeez, I'm drawing a blank on Carnage's host. Cleus. God. Anyway.
Woody Harrelson is
Woody Harrelson's character. I thought he did a pretty good job with the role, but they tried to build too much of like this weird side twisted love story thing between him and a character that you may or may not know about called Shriek, who was also in the film. Shriek was part of the Maximum Carnage series of comics that they did back in the day that spanned.
Was she one of the other symbiotes or the?
No. She was a mutant with sonic powers.
Oh, okay.
And she was part of like a troop where Carnage decided he wanted his own little crazy family, right? In the Maximum Carnage series. So it was like her, Doppelganger, and him just tearing apart the entire city. But in that one, you had Venom reluctantly teaming up with Spider-Man to be able to deal with the three of them, right?
Right.
Because neither one of them could handle them on their own. And this one, they pretty much got Venom just facing off against Carnage and Shriek with no Doppelganger, because they haven't introduced like the whole clone series into Spider-Man yet. They haven't done that in any one of the universes. Her? No, she's absolutely she's not a symbiote at all.
Okay, all right.
She doesn't have a symbiote, and she never did. If you ever look at the SNES game, the Maximum Carnage game, when you get to the rooftop on the top stage, the one that's shooting the bolts down and stuff like that, that's supposed to be Shriek. Why they look like lightning bolts, I have no idea. But she's the one on there who looks kind of like a punk rocker. I'll see if I can find a picture of her and send it to you later. But yeah, she's in there, and I thought it came out pretty good. I thought it was another good entry in the series, but then I liked the first movie, even though I admittedly understand it's kind of a bad movie. I get my chuckles out of it. It comes off as kind of like a buddy movie, almost like a buddy cop film, like an anti-cop film. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I enjoy it from that aspect. But then I'm going into these movies like I do most of the Marvel movies. I'm not expecting massive character development. I'm not expecting huge growth. I'm expecting them to be personal. I'm expecting them to act like the character, maybe have a smidge of personal growth that may or may not last into the next film, and to have a big battle through a good chunk of it. And that's all I expect. If you go into Marvel movies and Sony movies with that attitude, you're usually not as disappointed as you think you're going to be.
You're going to be okay.
You're going to be fine. I mean, it's not Man from U.N.C.L.E., it's not Casablanca, it's not, Young Frankenstein or any of those, great movies that stand the test of time. It's going to be here, and you're going to go back and you're going to watch it again, and you'll have a few chuckles, and you go, that was kind of a neat action scene. And it may or may not hold up because it's CGI, right? CGI has a spotty record of holding up. And Lance, by the way, I do plan on doing a little bit of historical notes in the movie reviews when I do them. I already have a few notes jotted down, not anything huge, but that is something I'm going to do. I wanted to answer that, and I was typing it, and then I got in this conversation and forgot to answer it, so I wanted to answer it. So let's go ahead and get into topic one. We are
right on.
We're like 15 minutes in. We haven't started topic one. Do you guys want to start with the question that we had posed to us, which are posed by Panda Sub? Mike, I know you know what it is. I don't think Rob knows because I don't think he's on Twitter at all. Basically, the question.
Lord, no.
He's not drunk enough for Twitter yet.
Yeah, I think it's going to happen. I'll take the crib notes, though, so.
Okay. Mike, do you want to start with that, or do you want to just start going through the history of Sega here and kind of move our way up and then talk about it?
Well, Panda Sub should stick around for a little while, so let's do it later.
Okay. All right. That's good. We're going to make him wait.
So that's how we keep him from leaving.
Make him wait. Make him wait. That's right. So now, my knowledge of Sega pretty much, well, my first hands-on experience is with the Genesis. Now, I've gotten a little bit of experience with Master System, none with the SG-1000. And I'm fuzzy on Saturn because I've seen stuff on it, but I never owned one. So I had the Genesis and the Dreamcast, or the two main consoles that I owned from Sega. It doesn't keep me from being a Sega fan by any means, and I have kind of started going back and looking at the Master System games and thinking which ones I want to pick and choose, because I bought the converter for the Genesis back in the day. And as soon as I had that thing in my grubby little hand, Toys R Us, which was the only place that carried Master System games, pulled every single one of them off the shelf, and I could never find them again. So I had absolutely no use for my converter, ever. Which started my downward spiral on Sega as soon as it started, because it was $100, absolutely wasted.
Put that right there.
Oh.
I was sad panda.
I had a Genesis back in the day. I graduated from the NES to the Sega Genesis. And
did you really graduate, though?
I feel.
Did you really graduate? Just giving you a hard time, bud. Mike's there going,
wow. We're just going there. We're just going right there.
Whereas some of my friends went with the Super Nintendo, I went with the Genesis. That's as far as I went with Sega. The first console I played of the 32-bit generation was the Saturn. When I went over to one of my friend's house, he had both the PlayStation and the Saturn set up, and so I played. They were playing the Saturn when I arrived. So my first Saturn experience was with Mega Man 8 and Symphony of the Night.
Wow.
And then we went on
those
to
are good experiences.
Yeah, they're pretty good. And then we went on to play the PlayStation, and then literally I never saw the Saturn again.
That's sad. Because I'm gonna jar your memory real quick. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Mike rolls off screen again.
I do have it right here. I mean, as a kid,
I saw your Saturn there. Now, I also had the Game Gear. I was big into my Game Gear back in the day, too. Wow, on the Game Gear. Wow. Are we dissing the Game Gear already?
Oh, wow.
Nice. That case looks good, too.
Oh, yes. Oh, well, you want to know why? You want to know what this game is worth right now?
No.
Let me pull up my Game Eye app. Yes, you do.
He doesn't. I'm pretty sure he doesn't.
I'm about to make you cry. Hold on one second. So let's see. Filter by console. Filter Sega Saturn.
Oh, do you have the?
I use Game Eye, which is a really good. It's a really good collector.
Yeah, I have.
And Ted, there's a really good reason why everybody in college played the Genesis back in the day, and we'll get into some of that.
Mega Man 8, and it's not the most expensive Saturn game either by any stretch, but Mega Man 8 right now, complete in box, is worth $617.
Yeah, Saturn games are way overpriced.
Well, it's not that they're it's so. The problem is that no Saturn game. There was no Saturn game that produced over 100,000 copies. Because by the time they
epically nuked themselves on that one, dude.
Yes. So
I've never seen a company willfully slit their throat as badly as they did with that console.
They are, and we'll get into that. They are. The Saturn games are becoming highly collectible because they are so rare.
I just want something that emulates them. I don't want to pay $700.
Well, the Poly Mega does, but you still have to have the game.
Still have to have the game, and I don't want to
Yeah.
spend $600 per disc, man. That's I can't. I could buy lenses and entirely new camera systems for that.
This is true. This is true.
Or PlayStation 5.
Or PlayStation 5, or a Series
PlayStation
X,
5.
or
Absolutely.
you know,
I mean,
I
I'm
could
trying
support myself for Game Pass for the next 12 years.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing what these games are worth. I'm trying to see. I mean, I've got half of my library is worth over. Is worth $100 or more.
That's.
I mean, even games like Astal is worth $108.
I don't even know a stall.
I think my most valuable. I think my most valuable Saturn game is that Golden Axe Fighter.
Oh,
that one was interesting. I put that on like Weird Oddity Games. That one was kind of neat because you actually had to collect magic on the ground in order to use like spells and stuff. That was kind of interesting.
I don't think I was ever able to actually beat anyone on that game when I played it. I played it for like an hour. I'm terrible at fighting games, but usually I can button mash my way through at least the first 1 or 2 matches. Not with this game.
Is that Golden Axe the Duel?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's worth $118.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't even know about that game until I was like trying to look up obscure fighting games for that video, and I'm like, really? There was a Golden Axe fighting game?
Yeah.
So it immediately went in there because I don't know anybody that ever heard of it, like ever. And Doug's saying that you can get some Saturn games cheaper if you import the Japanese version.
Yes, that is actually true. That is actually true. My most expensive Saturn game right now, as it stands, is Burning Rangers, and that's $720.
It's craziness.
It is.
So, Mike, where did you start with Sega? Did you start with a Master System? Did
no, actually,
in the SG-1000
no,
or anything like that?
I actually started with the Genesis. I was a PC guy, and I just remember wanting a Nintendo Entertainment System, and my dad at the time worked for a toy store, and he brought the Genesis home, and I was really disappointed. I wanted an NES. All my friends had an NES. Of course, I'm not. I was a teenager, so let's see. 96, I was not 96. 92.
86?
Sorry, no, I'm sorry. 92 was because we were just talking Saturn. Sorry.
Okay.
So when the Genesis came out, I was how old was I? I don't know. I was. Let's see, 88. 89. Okay, so it released in 1989. So 82. Let's see, 73, 83, 84, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I was 15 years old when the Genesis came out.
Okay, so I was slightly younger than you. I was like 12 when it came out.
Yeah. So, I asked for an NES for Hanukkah. My dad brought me home a Genesis. And I'm like, what is this? I was like, no, this is not what I wanted. What is this thing? And he was like, look, I read all about it. They said this is better. I said, no, there's nothing better than the NES. And I was like pissed.
Oh,
I
guess it's kind of debatable whether it was better than the NES or not. It
was better than the NES.
It was pretty good, but it was also
better than the NES.
It's debatable.
I think the overall library is a little weaker.
Not that debatable.
The NES. The NES has a big, robust library. It's got a lot of garbage. Don't get me wrong.
It's got a lot of garbage.
So does the Genesis.
So
go back and look at some of the Genesis games. There's a lot of trash.
Just saying.
I would chuck almost every single sports game out the window, and that's like 2/3 of its library.
What?
Really?
Yes.
What?
Yes.
No.
I don't do sports games.
Fight.
Well, that's
fight. That was a big selling point for the Genesis, though.
I was going to say
it was a big selling point with sports.
Yeah,
that was a huge selling point.
Yeah, I don't know where I don't know. There's what this is.
I was never a sports fan, dude. They had tons of other stuff on there I loved, but I never touched the sports games. What was that, Rob?
I feel like your opinion might be wrong. No, I don't know.
What, me?
I don't care about sports games at all. But I can acknowledge that there had to be some good ones, I suppose. I saw they're playing some hockey game on Swingers. Remember that movie? No,
Some
was it
hockey
Swingers?
game. So
Oh,
specific.
Probably NHL.
That's probably what it was.
So anyway, and I tell this story a lot. This is my favorite story to tell. I was so upset. I didn't even want to. So I didn't want it. I wanted an NES. So so Dad's like, well,
of course
try
he's
it.
going to.
So I put it out of the box and I plugged it up, and the pack-in game was Altered Beast.
Okay, so you were an early adopter. I was about to say, which game
This
did it
was
have when you bought it? Because they
Altered
changed it
Beast.
to Sonic later.
Yeah, no, I had Altered Beast. It was around, again, holiday 19, around Hanukkah time. So I turn it on. I hit, I see this the Altered Beast thing. I hit start game up, and I hear rise from your grave, and I'm like, holy shit! And I see this character come up, and he's like, Nintendo characters like this big. Mario's
Yeah, he's
like this.
huge.
I see this dude. He is this big on my screen, and I am like, oh my Lord. And he's punching and kicking, and he turns into the wolf. And I was like, all right. Then I started to play some other games. I picked up games like Decap Attack and Tasmania. And
I can't get a handle on Decap Attack. I want to love that game, but I struggle to figure out like how it wants you to do certain things in those stages. Like they just don't make sense.
Some of the fun of it. But
I think you and Corge are about to fight here.
Television had better sports. No, we're not talking about that right now. But I had, and then the launch title, Tommy Lasorda baseball, and Buster Douglas boxing, and like Tommy and Patrick Riley basketball, which actually looked like an updated version of Double Dribble, and I went nuts, and then I just became this hardcore Sega guy. Like Nintendo was for kids. I was all in. And when I say all in, I bought the Sega CD. I bought the 32X. There's my 32X right there. I bought the Saturn at launch.
See, I was with you till the 32X. And you lost me at 32X. I did not do the 32X.
I was all in, man. All in. I got the 32X. And to date, my absolute most expensive game in my library right now is a 32X game.
Oh, is it the Spider-Man game?
It's one of the worst games ever made.
It's got to be Spider-Man
horrible,
game.
But it's Spider-Man Web of Fire.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
It is worth. Yep, I've shown it. It's over on the shelf. And that one, just for the fun of it, that one is currently worth $1,400.
Valis is a great game. Actually, it's a really good series.
So, Valis, yep. But there were games like Sword of Vermilion, right? And you start that game up. There was a difference between, the NES with the and Sword of Vermilion when you fired it up and it went and this thunder thing of lightning, and you start hearing this music, and you're like, wow, you hear all this guitar and crazy stuff, and then you start seeing, you don't like sports games, but man, you start seeing Madden, and it's just all of a sudden there's this just larger than life. Tasmania looked like a freaking cartoon. It looked like that was
another thing they did, and I want to get into that in a little bit. I want to get everybody's first impressions of the console, and then move from the Master System up, because there's some background on why they made the moves they did for the Genesis that the Master System set up because of how it went down. So let's go ahead and go through with the rest of your thoughts, and then we'll go to Robert, and then I'll go to like mine, because I have a mixed result compared to you guys, I feel like. Because I had both the SNES and the Genesis, so I had them as direct comparisons at the same time.
I feel like we're headed into Toe Jam and Earl territory with you.
Do it.
So I mean, I became a Sega guy just all the way. I did not.
Jim! Sorry, I have to stop.
Hello,
Jim,
and 21 Sandwich. What's up, man? I did
Sandwich
not.
is in here too.
Oh, and Doug's Gaming. I'm sorry, I missed
Doug's
him.
Gaming is in here. I said hi
21
to Doug
Sandwich, what's going
earlier.
on? Sorry, I didn't say hi earlier.
I did not own another Nintendo product until the N64.
Really?
Yep.
Interesting.
And I worked for EB when it was Electronics Boutique. Right before I started there, when it was Games and Gadgets, and then they changed over to Electronics Boutique. I was in the thick of the 16-bit wars. Like I had to endure
Boots on the
having to
ground. In the trenches.
I had to endure having to sell Street Fighter 2 on the SNES to people, rubbing it in until Mortal Kombat came out. And then I was just like, yeah, my turn. You know, it was like I was entrenched in that.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you on Mortal Kombat as well, actually.
You are welcome to, and you know, you're entitled to your own opinion.
So, Rob, where's your stance on this? I know who all I got to like duke it out with today. I already know I got a fight going with Mullis. So I'm all like,
well, see, I already knew that I wanted the Genesis before I got it. So I went to one of my cousins had it, and I went to his house and I played Sonic the Hedgehog and Road Rash, and loved Sonic the Hedgehog. And so that's the first. I got the Sonic the Hedgehog as the pack-in game when we got it.
okay.
And then I feel like at the time I just didn't really explore the system in nearly as much as I probably should have. I rented games. I ended up with probably like 5 games over the because I got it when I was in maybe 7th grade, and I played it all the way through high school until I became too old for video games. So I would say through my junior year, and I probably ended up with maybe 5 games. The 3 Sonic games. I never ended up with Sonic and Knuckles. I got Aladdin and Jurassic Park. Those are the so I got like shitty games. Yes, I'm saying that those are shitty games.
I'm sorry,
Yeah, I
Aladdin?
could say, a lot of people didn't like Aladdin. Aladdin's got a great art style. I will give it that.
That's all
And
I got.
that is one of the
Who
things
said-
I thought Genesis always did a
said they
really
didn't
good
like
job with was
Aladdin?
searching games.
I do not like Aladdin, so
Wow. Okay.
I think it's
Okay.
we don't need to go there. I've already hashed that out with a lot of other YouTubers. Alpha Nerd might be in here at some point.
Yeah, I was about to
'cause
say
might
you're in the
sense I'm-
minority on there because most people love that game.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
It's a very beautiful game. Very
The one
very
you can get them to
nicely
agree on that nobody likes
animated.
is Lion King. Most everybody hates Lion King.
I never played it.
Yeah, I didn't play.
I don't
Lion
like the
King.
Genesis version of Aladdin either, though. So whatever. I think they're both flawed, but I mean, it's like I had it. I beat that game plenty of times, and then when I actually became an adult and started, going to the fan sites, and I saw how much people were just like still fawning all over that game. It's like, really, Genesis Aladdin? Yeah, janky. You didn't think it was janky? I thought it was kind of janky.
No.
All right.
It was smooth as silk. Actually, it was actually
Yeah,
one of the things. It was one of the 2 games that Disney really nailed as far as the animation. That and Castle of Illusion.
I love the Castle of Illusion. I never owned it, but I did rent it several times. That was when I started collecting for the Genesis. That was probably the first game that I went after.
That game was
was Castle-
special.
I love that game. And then that was kind of it. I got distracted a lot by the fact that a lot of the games that I loved on the NES, which is where I started, never came to the Genesis. It's like Mega Man. Yeah, there was a Mega Man game on the Genesis, but we didn't really get it. It wasn't really a real release. Super Nintendo was getting Mega Man X. We didn't. The Super Nintendo was getting the Star Wars games. I wanted those so bad, didn't get it. All the games that I was kind of salivating, because I continued to actually have a Nintendo Power subscription because I still had an NES and a Game Boy. while I owned the Genesis. And I was like, when I saw the other games that are coming out on the Super Nintendo, I just had a lot of SNES envy. And yet I never actually even played a Super Nintendo until long after that generation was over. So I ended up not really having much of an affinity for either console, just because I had like one foot out the door the entire time with the Genesis, and I never really experienced the Super Nintendo. So there we go. That's my
Hey,
Sega
Dr. Gamble.
story. Dr. Gamble, how's it going?
I'm listening in the background because Diablo
won't kill himself.
Yeah, I'm gonna be streaming a lot of that. I'm kind of hating myself because I'm missing out on streaming it tonight. He's been really hooked on it lately. So my experience pretty much starts with the Genesis as well. I never even knew about the Master System until after I got the Genesis and then saw the Master System games, which is why I originally wanted and begged for Mom to give me the converter, which turned out to be completely useless to me at the time. Now, I got the initial launch one with Altered Beast. Now, I loved me some Altered Beast, and I did love me some Genesis, but when it came down to it, there were certain things, and I know tech-wise, it kind of leans the other way, but I thought the color palette on the SNES was better, for one. And two, I thought the audio was better. And people always counted the Genesis audio to be better than the SNES, but depending on the title, I would find it to be better on the SNES. It's kind of why I liked Mortal Kombat better there. One, I already had a 6-button controller, which I couldn't get my hands on at the time for the Genesis. I couldn't find one. So it was a nightmare to play stuff like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter on it whatsoever. Because eventually you got Street Fighter Championship Edition on the Genesis. Yeah. It did eventually launch.
Yes.
It just took it forever.
No, you're right. Well, because there was a deal with Nintendo in place.
So when it came down to the gameplay and the audio and the graphical experience, I enjoyed the SNES one better. Now, when Mortal Kombat 2 came out, if anybody tries to tell me the Genesis version is better, you guys are insane. Because there were no differences there was no need for a blood code. Everything was identical, right? And it just ran and looked cleaner on the SNES. And that made sense because the system came out a little bit later. And it was a little bit more powerful, I think, like overall than the Genesis was. And the Genesis wasn't really trying to be the most powerful one. It was trying to be
so yes and no.
Budget conscious at that time.
No. So yes and no. So all right. So the Genesis had a stronger CPU than the Super Nintendo did. It also ran games at a higher resolution than the Super Nintendo did. Where the Super Nintendo excelled was in its color palette. The Genesis was only capable of running 64 colors out of a 4096 color palette, whereas the Super Nintendo could run 256 colors out of a 512K palette, something like that. So there was that. But as far as the processing power, the Genesis was a stronger console.
Dreadpool's in here. Hey, Dreadpool.
Hey, what's up, Dread? So.
But blast processing.
I think the music.
Don't you slander?
Don't
you slander blast processing in it?
Oh, I'm going to slander.
I think the music was a matter of taste, though. I think. I think honestly, it kind of seems like the Genesis could look as good and sound as good as the amount of work that the developers are going to put into it. Like Sonic the Hedgehog looks fantastic. It looks like a rival to your best looking Super Nintendo games. It sounds great. But then you look at other games that were kind of rushed out and they don't sound good. The graphics look muddy and grainy. And it's I think it does sound better if they're I guess more reasonably ranked with a port, like maybe Zombies Ate My Neighbors. Might actually, I think even that game actually sounds better on the Super Nintendo. There are rare cases where the Genesis sounds better. I don't like the Genesis or the Super Nintendo sound chip though. I can't stand all the reverb and the sampling. I prefer like a more traditional chip sound, which is, I think you get more out of the Genesis with that twang.
That FM modulation chip that Yamaha chip that the Genesis has a very capable ability, but Nintendo went for the sampled sound.
And I think this sounds like crap. So I mean, I'm glad we're not having a Super Nintendo conversation because I have a lot of fantastic things to say about that console either. So I'm glad
I was a fanboy of both. I'll be honest. I had games on both, and there were certain games that I liked better on Genesis, and there were certain games I liked better on the Super Nintendo. Like Mortal Kombat, I played a version of it on the Genesis. I ultimately went with it with the SNES just because I preferred that one. I could have gotten either one. The controller I had for it was better, and it just ended up being a better experience for me. Mortal Kombat 2, I kind of felt the same way. I did most of my fighters on the Super Nintendo. Now, I had things like Phantasy Star and stuff like that on the Genesis, Altered Beast, Sonic. I had Last Battle. There were a lot of quirky, weird games on the Genesis, and where that comes from is they were kind of... And by the way, hi, Phil. How are you doing? It's good to see you. Where that came from, I feel like, is they really, really had to swing for the fences. Because they brought out the Master System. They didn't really do good marketing on it. Didn't really get a lot of market penetration in most areas. It didn't really land in a lot of stores. It was mostly sold in places like Toys R Us. I could walk into Walmart and pick up a Nintendo. I couldn't walk into Walmart and pick up a Master System in my area. Now, your mileage may vary with that, but that's how my area was. So I initially gravitated towards Nintendo and not the Master System. Now, having gone back and played some of the Master System games, I can kind of see why it didn't really get the market penetration because the controls aren't as tight. They're a little slippery. Sometimes they're a little too slow. Sometimes they're a little too fast. Things seem a little glidey. Jumping's a little hit or miss on it. And things are just a little bit off. And it showed in the sales because they only sold, I want to say, 10 million units versus 40 million NESs. They got absolutely stomped in the 8-bit era. And I would attribute a lot of that to lack of marketing, right? Because they didn't do much marketing, and most people just didn't know about them. Whereas, you're playing with Power was freaking everywhere, right? Everybody knew about Nintendo.
Yeah.
So when the Genesis came out, they were really keen on not only coming out first, but coming out hard. So they were I don't think they were the first 16-bit console. I think that was the PC Engine and then the TurboGrafx. But in the States, they were the first one to launch.
It was actually the Intellivision that was first 16-bit.
Okay, I'm talking about the first in the 16-bit console wars. I'm not talking about the first one with a 16-bit CPU that barely pulled off 4-bit graphics. So we're not going to go into that discussion tonight. Because I know it had a 16-bit CPU that it did nothing with, especially since the NES used an 8-bit graphics processor and then had a side GPU that was ultimately cheaper than that processor was and did 10 times more with it.
So what we're going to do then, I mean, if we're going to be honest then, the TurboGrafx had an 8-bit CPU.
It did. It absolutely did. Now, why it was actually in the 16-bit was because the graphics power allowed it to do 16-bit graphics.
Correct. It could do 400 and some odd colors.
Yes. But when you start actually looking at graphical capabilities and the reason that I'm discussing it this way is because when you start looking at 16-bit, I'm looking at things that actually look like they use 16 bits. You can look at the Intellivision and you can go, it looks a little better than Atari. And that's all you can say.
Yeah.
And a lot of that had to do with memory capacity, processing power, things like that they just couldn't get at the time. Technology wasn't there to push the processor that they put in there. So honestly, even though it was the first 16-bit system, it was kind of a waste of money to put that in there. They could have gone with the 6502 like the NES did and come out ahead.
No, I agree.
And now Mike's not talking to me anymore.
No. I agree. But I don't know. There were not a lot of games on the TurboGrafx that looked better than Genesis games. I mean, they still looked like decent They look decent, but I don't know. There are too many games that really took on the Genesis.
Here's the problem. We're only seeing the TurboGrafx games for the most part. The PC Engine was a different beast. So if you can get a hold of like Japanese games and get those to run, which basically means getting a PC Engine, I think the tables might turn a little bit. I think the color palette and the sound was a little bit better on both the Genesis and the Super Nintendo, personally. But that's from what little I've managed to experience, because getting things to run from TurboGrafx, particularly like some of the older PC Engine stuff, is spotty. Some of it works great, and it's really fun. Stuff like Air Zonk, Thunder, things of that nature. I don't think Bloody Wolf is as good as Contra, personally, and I know the Spirit of Cyrus will come in and smite me for that one. But that's a personal opinion for something that's more like isometric and trying to do a run and gun like Contra, but not really doing it quite as cleanly as, say, like Contra did, right? Or even Hard Corps. Which, honestly, if you're going to talk like games that were better in that era that I had no idea about, Hard Corps beats Contra 3 any day of the week.
I get you. I get that.
And I liked Contra 3 back in the day. I had a lot of fun with Contra 3.
Contra 3 wasn't as good, but to me, Contra 3 wasn't as good as...
Ninja Spirit is evil. That's a beautiful game, but that game's evil, dude.
I agree with whatever Mike was about to say about Contra 3. It sounded like it was going to be kind of
disparaging.
Yeah, it's not as good as the original.
Agreed.
And honestly, to me, one of the best Contra games, literally, is Contra Hardcore.
I haven't gotten to Hard Corps yet. I wanted to finish the original Contra, and then I might go into Super C and then Hard Corps later. Hard Corps was on my list to do, but Hard Corps, the first time I booted up that game, I think I died as soon as I spawned. I'm like, all right, well, this is going to be a new experience.
Yes, I have also played Hardcore a little bit, and I can't get past the first. Not enough to finish the first stage. It was a little crazy. I could already tell that I would like it better than Contra 3, though. I'm not a huge fan of Contra 3.
Yeah. Your viewpoint on Contra 3 is well known.
Good. I want everyone to know.
But Mode 7, man. Mode 7.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, you hate Mode 7 in Contra 3. I know you hate Mode 7 in Contra 3.
I hate headaches, too, so it's like...
So when they moved into the Genesis era, the kid gloves were off. They started trying to make a mascot. They launched with Altered Beast, which was basically an arcade port. Probably the best arcade port I think that ever got done of Altered Beast. Maybe the only arcade port of Altered Beast, because I think it was a Sega game to begin with. I think it was a Sega arcade game. So they only really brought it to the Genesis. So that started them off with that. Revenge of Shinobi, which launched in that December, which, as much of a love-hate relationship as I have with that game, it does some amazing things. The parallax scrolling in that, between the wind moving things, the background moving, the forefront moving, and everything in between, makes that a very immersive game. There's a Famicom port of Altered Beast, really? Okay, I'm gonna.
Yeah, it was.
Is that like a fan-made thing? I think I saw that.
I think it was developed by Big Tokai. I think it doesn't look that bad. It doesn't look great, but it does look. It looks kind of fun. I watched Eugene play it.
That's where I remember seeing it now.
I think you were
watching.
I
remember looking at going, huh? Why are you a shark now? I'm confused. Because
I added like 3 more stages in some more beasts. It wasn't pretty good, actually. I kind of want it. Not arcade faithful at all. Other than you could tell what game it is. And that's about the extent of it.
Right. Now, when the Genesis hit, this is where sports games really took off. Not that there weren't sports games on the NES. There were. Most of them weren't real sports games. There were more cartoony sports games. There were a couple attempts here and there, but nothing major. And that's where we differ in the library, because what Sega did for sports games was phenomenal, I just wasn't a fan of sports games, so I didn't partake in a lot of those. Those were always the sections that I pretty much skipped over. But they pretty much started sports games as we know them today with Sega Sports.
Who was the guy, Mike? Who was the guy who was running the American division of Sega at that time? Was that
Tom Kalinske?
Yeah,
Tom
Kalinske, I think. Yeah.
I think he was the one that sold the idea of not just sports games, but celebrity indoor sports games. Was going to be the key to getting a strong foothold in the American market.
He was also the brainchild. He was also the brainchild behind coming up with a mascot for the system in Sonic. Not Sonic specifically, but he wanted a mascot to rival Mario.
You know what the crazy part of Tom Kalinske was? He knew nothing about video games.
He didn't need to. He
I
knew
don't think
marketing.
he needed to,
Yeah.
He knew how to market things and sell things.
And I think
when he was working for Mattel, he was the brains behind, Hot Wheels and Masters of the Universe, and all of a sudden, they bring him in, and then he became. Didn't he? He went to work because he did Hot Wheels. I think he went to work for Matchbox for a while, and then they brought him into Sega, and like he didn't know jack about video games. It was amazing.
They did not like him either.
Yeah,
So
I think that if
Japan
they'd
was
actually
not a fan.
if they'd let him do more of his ideas, and they wanted to disagreement them just for the sake of we don't want you to get your way, you stupid American. I think it's kind of what the relationship was like. It's obviously, I think with our hindsight, we could see that it's kind of Sega Japan's fault that
oh goodness, yes,
all that went down the way it did.
Oh, the entire fall of Sega, honestly, in some ways, goes through Japan.
Oh, I absolutely blame Japan for the fall of Sega.
Yeah.
And there's reasons as we go through this timeline, key moments where you can see it going downhill, because the Genesis itself had very, very little market penetration, even being the first 16-bit system in Japan. And part of that had to do with the PC Engine, because it launched a little bit earlier and it got a ton of support in Japan. Matter of fact, I think the total tally of games on the PC Engine, which is more than the Genesis and then NES combined, of over 600 games.
Yeah.
So, monstrous library, more than almost any other console I can think of.
And the craziest part is, people think Sega is or started out as a Japanese company. They didn't.
No, it was American.
It was an American company. It was a part of a company called Gulf and Western Industries. What did
Sega initially stand for? It was like, oh god, I can't think of the name. I can't think of it right now.
Service Games.
Yeah, it was something Games of America or something like that.
Yeah, Service Games. Well, because they were strictly an arcade game manufacturer.
Yeah, and then they were, and then they got bought. Then they got bought up by Japan and started making.
Well, yes and no. So there's a weird story. There's a kind of a weird arc to this, because Gulf and Western sold the arcade side and all of its licensing for its arcades to Bally, and then they kept all the R&D, and they kept the Japanese side, Sega Enterprises. So then they're the ones who kind of said, all right, the Japanese company, the Japanese side will kind of take over kind of running Sega. It was just so weird how it turned that way, because they had at the time, his name was I used to know this, Nakayama. What's his first name? I used to know this stuff.
I should remember this.
President, it was look it up. His name was Nakayama. He was the president of Sega Japan at the time, or Sega Enterprises. He's the one who talked Gulf and Western into trying to do consoles and and start in Japan and then see how it went. So he's the one who really got the SG-1000 started, and that's where it all kind of started from. So
I can't pronounce this, but it's spelled Hayao.
Hayao
Hayao.
Nakayama. Thank you. And so it was just kind of weird. At some point,
Jim's got it. Jim had it before I did. I just had been looking it up. My bad. Sorry, Jim.
And then at some point, Golf and Western kind of just spun it off, and then Nakayama and David Rosen, they bought out the rest, and then Nakayama was CEO of Sega. So that's really it. It's weird. It just kind of morphed into a Japanese company, but it wasn't at the start.
Yeah. And honestly, you could almost pin that, well, as part of its success and part of its failure, because as the Genesis moved along, they launched the Sega CD in response to the TurboGrafx CD coming out, which was a good move at the time because they got it out before the TurboGrafx, the Turbo Duo came out.
Yep.
Which got them into the market, which also halted the TurboGrafx 16 getting any speed. Because the Turbo Duo was their next entry that was supposed to pretty much catapult them ahead of people, because they technically had the first CD-based system out, not the Sega CD.
Right.
So the first CD-based system was the TurboGrafx in Japan. They launched there first. So they beat them to the States. So they cut them out there. And then 32-bit systems were on the horizon, because Sony had been in talks with them and Nintendo at one point to make a 32-bit console. They tried to work with both parties. Nintendo turned them down, so they went to Sega. Sega also turned them down, and then got word that Sony was about to start to launch PlayStation.
Yeah. Well, remember what happened originally. Nintendo right after the TurboGrafx CD and the Sega CD came out. What did I miss? So this was a crazy, again, another crazy weird thing that caused the entire industry to go on its side. Nintendo and Sony was going to develop the CD drive for the SNES. And instead, Nintendo pulled out at the last minute and went with Philips.
Yeah, because they didn't like Sony.
Right.
It was a personal thing from the head of Nintendo.
They didn't even have the. They didn't even give Sony the respect of telling them that way. I think they told them by announcing that they were going to be working with Philips too.
Yeah,
like they just as many middle figures as they could put up. They did.
And then they screwed themselves by not even making the thing, and Philips went off to make the CDI. And Sony got so pissed that they're like, all right, we'll make our own console.
Nintendo literally made their own worst enemy. That effectively killed their biggest competitor also. So
they made their second worst enemy too. This is a story for another time with Microsoft, because they did the same thing with Microsoft.
Nintendo, for all intents and purposes, created the PlayStation.
Yeah.
They pretty much created that story. They pretty much created the Xbox too.
Yes. So,
which is another interesting story for another time, because maybe we'll do like another one of these on Nintendo and their food paws. Yeah. So the 32X, the Sega CD was actually really well received overall.
Yeah, let's talk about the Sega CD.
Let's stick with the Sega CD for a little bit, and then we'll move to the 32X, because the 32X
Mike,
is a pretty quick
going. I'm going to grab a top off my drink. Right back.
All right.
I know you can go on this for a while.
We're going to hit Sonic CD, and we'll lose like 3 hours.
No, because I'm still going to try to get to bed by 12:30. The Sega CD. So I was on another show called the Iron Lords Podcast. I have good friends there, and we're all a bunch of us Sega guys got together to do a Sega roundtable, and they were asking us all. We were asking each other, "What's your favorite Sega system?" And everyone expected me to say the Dreamcast, because the Dreamcast is the best one of the best systems ever created, in my opinion, for many, many reasons. But my first love and my all-time favorite console was the Sega CD. Because at the time, yes.
Because I have some fond memories of it, but I don't think I'd call it like my favorite.
My fond memories include games like Sonic CD, include games like Sylpheed, include games like Terminator. Like, I didn't have the Genesis version of Earthworm Jim for very long once the Sega CD version came out. Now, the Sega CD had its issues. Most of the games were kind of remakes of Genesis games with a better soundtrack. There were a couple of good exceptions to that rule. One was Terminator, which was a whole different game on Sega CD. And then there were games that had add-on stuff. So like everybody knows the story of Batman Returns. The Batman Returns on the Genesis, the platform version, was garbage. It was not good. It was not a good game. You guys, anybody who watched me stream it a few weeks ago knows it's not a good game. But they added the driving scenes because the Sega CD could do sprite scaling and rotation in the hardware.
Yeah.
And it was nuts. And like a game like Sylpheed, which I thought was polygonal, and it turns out I was wrong after all of these years. They took a full motion video game, which was the other thing I really liked about the Sega CD.
I was about to say, they used FMV in some of those and also popularized that genre for a short time.
Yes, but they took a game with FMV and they put sprites over top of it to create polygons, and it worked. It freaking worked. So,
I had a handful of Sega CD games. Sewer Shark was one of them. I had an RPG that I can't remember the name of that I adored until the very end.
There were a lot of RPGs on the Sega.
I never had a Sonic CD, although I kind of wish I'd bought that one back in the day. And I had a handful of others, but those two were the main ones that popped in my head. I never had Night Trap.
Night Trap was good. Double Switch was decent. It wasn't as good as Night Trap. Double Switch had Corey Haim in it.
I don't think I have the Mortal Kombat because they ported that to the Sega CD as well.
Yep, I have Mortal Kombat.
And I never put that up because I had it already on the Super Nintendo, and the load times from looking on it made certain characters kind of hard to play, particularly Mortal Kombat 2. Shang Tsung was kind of a huge pain on CD systems and was even on the PlayStation. It kind of worked around that a little bit, I think, by only letting you mirror your opponent, because both of those were in memory. So that way they didn't have to load everything from memory, so you couldn't do like all the shifts, which I thought was kind of a weird cheat. And I think it was Lunar. I think it was Lunar, Jim.
Lunar the Silver Star. Oh.
And it was a great game. It was a beautiful game.
Courage Mist was not on Sega CD. It was on Sega Saturn.
I was not a big fan of Myst, personally. I had it on PC. It was okay.
It's like Seventh Guest, kind of.
I didn't get into that one either, and the reason I didn't get into it is because I played Myst, and I just started writing off games like that because I didn't enjoy Myst. So I wrote Riven Off and Seventh Guest and 11th Hour as well. Those are all kind of in that same vein, and I just sort of hard passed on all of them.
Right. I mean, there were games like Jaguar XJ220, which was a great racing game, with a soundtrack that I still love to this day. And I mean, just I'm looking over at my collection. I have a Prince of Persia game over there. I've got I even got dorky stuff. Like I got a Wheel of Fortune Sega CD game over there. Final Fight. Can't not talk about Final Fight, which actually was the best home console version of Final Fight that was released. The SNES version of Final Fight only had 2 characters and was a single player. Final Fight for the Sega CD was the full 3 characters, 2-player, had an kick-ass soundtrack, and some of the corniest, cheesiest dialogue ever created. it's a gem. What else have I got over there?
I got to show that one.
Cobra
Thank
Command,
you, Phoenix, for hanging out, by the way.
Cobra Command, which came out of the arcades, which was if anybody had ever played it, was a full motion video game cartoon, much like Dragon's Lair. And then
Jim's
that
here
spawned.
swinging at you.
That spawned Road Avenger and Time Gal. Time Gal was not great because the timing on that was horrible. Road Avenger, Time Gal, and Revenge of the Ninja. I mean, there was just so many great titles for the Sega CD. And I remember when I got it, it launched with 3 games. It launched with Soul Feast, rather, which was a CD port of Soul Dees on the Genesis. Sherlock Holmes, which was a full motion video game, and a triple pack of Golden Axe, Streets of Rage, and Columns. And I remember putting in Soul Feast, and I never played. That's right, SNES Final Fight left out the factory stage as well. No, Road Avenger is not bad at all. In fact, I love Road Avenger. It's my favorite of those cartoon games.
Yeah, I remember watching you play Road Avenger and,
Road Avenger,
and Time Gal a little bit.
Time Gal, the timing was really weird. Cobra Command was awesome. But anyway, I put in Soul Feast, and I never played Soul Dees. Yes, I had to pack in with Sherlock Holmes. And that soundtrack kicked in. And I was like, wow. And I like had, at the time, I spent a lot of money on my audio. I had Bose speakers and all this crazy stuff because I love audio. As an audiophile. Mm-hmm. Cranked that thing up, and this just pounding soundtrack was just washing over me.
Keely. Hey, Keely. How you doing, man?
Hey, Keely. So the Sega CD really held a special place for me. As I've become, and as I've become friends with, guys like Tommy Tallarico who pioneered CD music, I listen to the Terminator now, and I have such a deep appreciation. Of course, also knowing one of the songs in that game was a song that he remastered from a band he played in the 80s. So, and his Earthworm Jim soundtracks, and then Spencer Nilsson, who architected. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Rob. I'm monopolizing. You got me started on the Sega.
We got him started on Sega CD, man. I knew this was going to happen.
That's why I was able to actually get up and go. Spencer Nilsson is actually the one I think of as like the unofficial composer for the Sega CD. Like a lot of my favorite Sega CD soundtracks are like Batman Returns.
Yes. Echo.
I would say that the other
Sonic?
Spider-Man game.
Spider-Man versus Kingpin.
Yeah, but I guess I only know from the soundtrack and that it sounds very similar to Batman Returns. It's by Spencer Nilsson. So it's whenever I hear a really good soundtrack on the Sega CD, I always have to wonder: is this Tallarico now, or is this Nilsson?
You're right. There was another guy that did the soundtrack for games like Bug, which was a pretty good soundtrack. The guy's name was Greg Turner, so he did Bug, and then Bug 2. I used to know this. Hang on, I'm looking it up real quick. Bug 2's soundtrack was done by where was it? Oh, come on, Bug 2 game. I have to see who did. Yeah, I have to see who did the music for Bug 2.
But I'm trying to fill dead air here.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry.
Tell us a joke.
I mean, Sonic Boom. Yeah, I mean that's Nilsson doing that stuff was just spectacular. Tommy was spectacular. Bug 2 was done by, here we go. Audio for that one was Greg Turner. Okay, so he did both. I mean, there were
kind of a anticlimactic end to that.
Yeah, I know. I did both. Sorry. I mean, but so there was these folks that did, I mean, just some crazy stuff. Spider-Man versus the Kingpin also had a rock band do the intro. Do you remember? And it's right. I have Spider-Man versus Kingpin, and right in the front of the thing it says, soundtrack featuring song by Mr. Big. I never knew who Mr. Big was, but they did the song. It was Swing Time. That was their big thing.
Does anybody know who Popful Mail is? I don't think I've ever heard of this game.
Popful Mail?
Yeah.
That was an RPG.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah. It was actually it was kind of it's an action RPG. So it had a bunch of RPG type elements, but it was also kind of a platformer. So yeah, that one it came out on a bunch of stuff. It was out on the Sega CD. It was also out on the PC Engine.
Interesting.
I think, yeah.
I'm gonna have to see if I can get Sega CD emulating. I feel like I need to kind of go back and play some of these, and since I don't want to try to get a hold of a Genesis and a working Sega CD because those are a thing, and there's so many variations on them and how they connect too. I don't know if I want to dive into that.
Man, I know he's skipping ahead, but Dr. Gamelove had a comment about Mr. Bones.
Yeah, he had two actually.
Yeah,
the one up here about it being a Sega CD soundtrack.
Ronnie Montrose. Not to pimp my own channel, Dr. Gamelove, but if you go back to some of the archives on NLG last year, was it last year? It's either last year or the year before. We had an interview with Ed Annunziata, who was the designer of Mr. Bones. We talked about Ronnie Montrose because I loved his music, and I loved his music in Mr. Bones. And I actually like Mr. Bones a little better than I think you do. I have an appreciation for it. But we talked about, because he passed away, Ronnie Montrose, and that was like a big emotional thing for Ed. And one of the things that I did when we interviewed him was my intro video was for his particular show we interviewed him on was the soundtrack for was that opening soundtrack for Mr. Bones. It's cool. It's I'll throw the link in there. It was one of my more enjoyable interviews.
Hang on, I got this. Actually, well, I usually have that in the description, and I think I didn't get it in there today.
That's all right. I'm going to find the link to that particular podcast.
Here's the main channel for anybody who is not subscribed at this point. And then I'm going to put MrMatthews in chat as well because I forgot to put it in the tag. So we're going to go ahead and get it in there now. So not to rush too much, but I know we wanted to keep this around 2 hours. And if we don't move on from Sega CD, we won't.
I know.
We have like
it's okay.
3 more things to go through.
No, it's okay. I honestly could do an entire show on the Sega CD. I understand it.
And if we want to do some stuff like that, that's fine. We could do that in the future.
No,
I figured 2 hours. I figured 2 hours was solid for right now.
Yeah, so, totally cool.
Next up was the 32X, and the main reason the 32X was kind of the mess it wasn't so much that it was a bad idea. It was a poorly executed idea because of the way that, and this is pretty much the big turning point downward for Sega in a lot of ways, in my opinion, because they launched the 32X. They launched it in Japan first. It was developed by Sony of America. They went to them and said, hey, we need something to bridge this gap to the 32-bit generation. We know it's coming around the corner. We want to have something out before we can actually get out our next console, which is the Saturn. Something to fill that gap. When they launched it in Japan, they launched it 1 week before they launched the Saturn.
Yeah.
So that was pretty much why it got no support, because it was out for all of a week. Then the Saturn launched had Virtual Fighter on it. Sales weren't good on the 32X, obviously, because the Saturn existed in Japan. So for about 6 months to almost a year, the 32X limped along in the United States with competition like the PlayStation and the Jaguar. Now, personally, I think it looked better than the Jaguar, and the Spirit of Cyrus is going to kill me for that one too.
I don't know if I could go with that one. And the game that I'll put as my grail on that is Doom. Doom on the Jaguar ripped everyone's ass, including some 32-bit systems. The 32X Doom was horrible.
There were a lot of terrible games on the 32X. I think graphically, a lot of times it was comparable to or looked better than the Jaguar. I couldn't tell you about gameplay because I had no interest in either one of them. By this point, I had the Sega CD, which, while it had a couple good games that I really enjoyed, I didn't feel like there were enough games on there that I was really getting for support-wise. I had the converter, which I got nothing from. Now they're launching the 32X, and so we're an add-on central on the Genesis to where it looks like some sort of Franken machine. And they've got so many products that they're not really supporting any of them very well. Because you got to remember, the Sega CD, the Genesis, and the 32X are all running concurrently at this time, on top of the Game Gear, and I think the Nomad. So
well, you
all
can't,
of these
the
products
Nomad,
are running concurrently. Nomad basically played Genesis games, so it's not as big.
Portable Genesis.
It's still hardware that they're manufacturing. Right?
It is, but that's not a fair comparison because technically the TurboGrafx Express was just a TurboGrafx 16 handheld. So you can't.
But the TurboGrafx had a lot less stuff going on at the time compared to Genesis.
No, I don't disagree, but from a sheer standpoint of comparison, you gotta. It's not. I don't know. I don't know. That's not terribly fair. That's just me.
Okay.
It was.
Go ahead.
If you're going to say the Nomad is a separate console, you might as well just say the Genesis 3 was a separate console. The Genesis 2, it was a different kind of Genesis that was ultimately the same thing.
I was mostly thinking of just like a hardware manufacturing standpoint because they weren't manufacturing all the models of the Genesis at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But they did have the Nomad being manufactured, which could play the full-on Genesis games. I mean, if you want to talk about just separate different consoles, I'm like, okay, we're gonna call the Sega CD and the 32X separate consoles because they had their own carts, right? And then the 32X also had CDs that worked with the Sega CD, which was still part of the 32X. I'm not going to separate that, but it's another software line that they're running on top of the 32X attachment, right? So you got your 32X carts, you got your 32X CDs, you got your Sega CD, you got your Genesis, you got your Game Gear, all running concurrently at the same time. The converter was just there if you could find Master System games. Most people didn't have it attached at this time because you didn't have the 32X plugged in. So if you had that plugged in, you could mostly connect all your Genesis games and your 32X games and just run them through there and not have to disassemble anything. So you had your monster tower of power, as Jim put it, right?
Yeah.
Going on at that time.
Master System, does it connect to the 32X?
The game converter? No.
I don't think so.
Can you use it as work as a pass-through?
No.
So can you? No, it doesn't.
No, it does not.
Too bad. That's lame.
Yeah, I don't think you could. I don't think you could use those two concurrently. It was like the only thing you couldn't stack on the thing by the time you were done.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to engage. So
no, I don't think it does. And even the 32X had a couple of different variations on it, with limited degrees of successive connectivity and whether or not it would work or not.
Yeah.
So the product itself was A, rushed because they needed something in a hurry, B, poorly supported. And D, the Saturn came out. Then things got worse, unless you guys want to go into 32X games.
I mean, I would say there's probably 3 or 4 32X games that are of high quality. I mean, the Mortal Kombat 2 was spectacular on the 32X.
I do remember hearing that.
Calibri was really beautiful. Even though it wasn't a mainline Sonic game, Knuckles Chaotix was really cool.
I've heard it said that Knuckles Chaotix might actually be the unofficial best Sonic game.
Next to Sega Sonic CD, sure. I'll go with that.
Chaotix really just looked like chaos. There was a lot of weirdness going on with that. The gameplay was kind of confusing.
It was neat. Looking over at my collection, what else is over there that's really good? Star Wars Arcade, which Dr. Gamelove talked about. Star Wars Arcade was a solid port.
Star Wars Arcade was a great game, period. It was a great game for the time.
It was a solid port. The biggest issue with the 32X as far as power goes was it didn't. Companies that were able to actually use the SH2s inside of it were great, and virtual racing and virtual fighter were actually solid games on the 32X. But the problem is most developers kind of gimp the games by utilizing, for example, they would take and use the 32X for the front sprites, but use the Genesis for the backgrounds. So it was very kind of hodgepodge how people develop for it.
Yeah, so you'd have a great foreground character, but you'd have a trash background for it to be on a plane with.
Yeah.
Well, comparatively. The Genesis was capable of rendering some really great background sprites. There are plenty of games that prove that.
Oh, absolutely. And they were the kings of parallax scrolling.
Yes.
No.
Absolutely. Nintendo was focused on Mode 7 and rotating things.
Yeah.
Whereas Genesis really wanted to do clean, crisp. There's times where Mode 7 works, and there's times where it's complete poop.
That just cracks me up. Just a brief synopsis of the Super Nintendo. It's Mode 7 and they rotate things.
Right.
That was one of their big selling points, quite frankly.
Yeah, the sprite rotation actually was a big deal.
Yes, it was. It was a huge deal at the time.
Dude, F-Zero was mind-blowing. Super Star Wars?
Pete. We have Pete.
OEB Pete.
Yeah. Pete in the house.
The whole thing in this, and you were dead on about this.
Thank you.
Nick kind of talked about how Sega of Japan just steamrolled, over everybody, because back here the Genesis, and I get why they made the 32X. The Genesis was still selling over here, and they wanted to make this stopgap system. They wanted, the Saturn was going to be the expensive, big, giant. Look, putting it in today's terms, it's kind of funny. In today's terms, we would be talking about the Xbox Series X and the Xbox Series S. The 32X was kind of the S series system.
Yes.
You had a Genesis. This thing only cost you $150. You got to taste the 32-bit while you started saving up for your Saturn, right? But the problem with that was that third-party developers were like, no, we're going to make games for the Saturn. We don't want to port games to the 32X. So nobody wanted to make games for it. And so you only had
to do with the Saturn already being out. I mean, it wasn't out in the States.
It wasn't out in
Japan,
the States.
They had mostly Japanese developers. And Japanese developers wanted to develop for the Saturn.
Well, but EA at the time, EA ended up not developing for the Saturn. That's a whole different story. But companies that had not created consoles yet, like 3DO, who had put out game, Psygnosis, U.S. developers like EA, like these, they didn't want to make games for the system.
Comment. So much parallax. Look at it. Look at it. Acknowledge the parallax.
Parallaxing your eyes out. It was hard. Plus the games are so expensive. They were like $70. It was
the 32X games. I don't remember that. Well, okay, around that time, and when I say it was shortly after that, like the N64 managed to finally come out too. So that price gap didn't strike me as much because you had other cart-based games that were right around that price.
Mm-hmm.
And cart games were kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back on pricing back in the day, because CD games were around $40 and cart games were around $70 because memory was getting expensive again. It was getting expensive to make carts. And the 32X was still heavily based on that for the most part.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning, and that was Sega Japan mandating again. The first time that they didn't really like Tom Kalinske, but he was very successful, and they went with his marketing campaign, and it was working. And I agree that 32X wasn't really necessary. The Sega CD I thought was a good, reasonable add-on. I thought they could have waited and just brought out the Saturn and had been in a better stead than trying to bridge that gap with the 32X. I feel like that's when they started to lose consumer confidence because they weren't supporting it. People bought this expensive add-on for their Genesis. The games weren't of a good quality, and there weren't that many of them, and no one knew why. And then the PlayStation comes out shortly after and just starts like destroying it, because about the same time that the Saturn announced itself, States, not only did they botch this announcement, where they came out and said, "Hey, by the way, I have the Saturn, and it's going to be $400. And by the way, it's available
now." And developers were going, "Yeah."
And not only that, retailers were like, "I'm sorry, you said what?"
Yep, and
they lost major
KB Toy and Hobby said, "Oh, we're not
Best
part
Buy.
of your launch."
Best Buy as well. Best Buy said goodbye.
Yeah.
Toys R Us, I think, said goodbye as well.
I think Toys R Us was in the original.
Toys R Us was one of the few places that actually got it.
Yeah, Toys R Us, Babbage's, EB, Software, etc. And I thought that Walmart had gotten them, but I couldn't be sure.
I think Walmart pulled them as well. And when I mean pulled, we mean pulled all Sega. All of it.
Yeah.
Gone.
KB Toys it was KB Toys that dropped Sega. Walmart did not. KB Toys did. And I remember
a lot of retailers opted to pull everything off of the shelf.
KB said we're out totally.
Yeah. And and on top of that, as soon as Sony came on, immediately following that announcement, they just said one thing: $299, and walked off stage.
He dropped the mic too. Yeah, I don't know about that part, but it was basically it was
basically a mic drop before people knew what a mic drop was. And they came out roughly at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, this is where it got even more complicated and more troublesome for Saturn, because they lost Tom Kalinske, because Kalinske was trying to salvage this train wreck, and they wouldn't listen to him. So he jumped ship.
Mm-hmm.
He bailed. He's like, "I'm out. You guys aren't going to listen. You're not going to let me do my job. I'm just going to resign." On top of that, they had built two separate, I want to say graphics processors, one 2D graphics processor and one 3D graphics processor into the Saturn. And the reason they did that is because they were preparing for their next season of arcade titles. Sega was convinced that arcade was still where things were going. Things weren't going to move to the home market. Sony went all in with polygonal graphics and was able to crank out better polygonal and 3D graphics than the Saturn was, because the Saturn had like that 2D processor on top of a weaker 3D processor that they were trying to work with, because that was part of their game plan in the arcade, and they wanted closer to arcade perfect ports. Now, that doesn't mean the Saturn was bad. It did some amazing arcade ports, and the 2D games were probably some of the best of this era.
Well, what they really did was they took the same chipset that was in the 32X, and they put it into the Saturn. That's why they were so... That's why the 32X was kind of marketed as a 32-bit system. And then they decided, they had a VDP in the system. So it was originally going to be a it was originally going to be a single video processor. When Sony announced what they were doing, Sega threw a second processor in there, a second VDP in there to try to do. So like one VDP, it wasn't quite one did 2D, one did 3D. The way it worked was one of them calculated your graphics, the other one did your effects, could do your texture mapping, could do it sucked at transparencies, but did those extra things to try to pull some power off of the first VDP. They were two identical chips, which also created some of the issue with people trying to develop for it.
Yes, it was a nightmare to develop because of the way you had to program for it.
Yeah. You had two SH2 chips and two VDPs. And it was, when you had the internal, they ended up writing new libraries for third parties and for internal to do things. And when you had the right developer with the right tools, you got games like Panzer Dragoon. You got games, they did one hell of a port. Time Warner did one hell of a port of Virtual Racing. And of course, Sega had Virtual Fighter 2. There were some hot 3D games on there. The problem is...
I'm not saying the Saturn wasn't capable of doing 3D
No,
games. I'm saying
the
it was
problem
overly
is-
complicated and overly expensive.
but
Not really in line with where the market was going.
No, the PlayStation did it better, and Ridge Racer was the biggest kind of piece of that. Yeah. I mean, they had...
There were multiple things that they shot themselves in the foot with the Saturn. One was it was overly built and built in a way that they didn't think the market was going, in the opposite way that the market was really going to go. They couldn't have known that at the time. So I can't fault them too much for that. Their $400 price point, the early drop, all those things, I can fault them for. And then Jim made a good point that the early games were rushed because they weren't expecting the games to come out when they did in the States. So a lot of the early games were in particularly bad shape because they had to meet those launch dates. Matter of fact, there were almost no games for it at launch because most people couldn't get the games ready by the new date that got set. And the ones that were out there were like incredibly bad to begin with.
Wasn't Panzer Dragoon a launch game?
I don't know.
Was it a Panzer Dragoon and what were the three launch games?
It launched with it came with Virtua Fighter, but not a great Virtua Fighter.
But then they also like sent.
Yes, hold on. I will show you.
Okay.
Oh, here it comes. I would imagine most of the 2D fighters would probably be better on the Saturn overall. Its 2D processing capability was much better than the PlayStation.
Well,
not
just
that
that, but
PlayStation could pull it off,
the RAM
but
card,
the Saturn was built more for it.
and the RAM cart that you could get for the Saturn helped that a lot.
Yeah.
So here's the original Virtual Fighter, and it was, it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't arcade perfect. So those of us who could prove we bought the Saturn, we then got Virtua Fighter Remix, and that was a much better version. And of course, Virtua Fighter 2. Games like Clockwork Knight and Bug, like Dr. Gamelove was saying, Bug, even though Bug is an overtly hard game, visually, it's pretty kick-ass. Clockwork Knight's beautiful.
Clockwork Knight's a very pretty game. It looks a little clunky to play, but it's a very pretty game for that era.
So I'm looking at what launched in
I'm trying to
US.
find that too. I don't know why I'm struggling. Seems like that'd be like readily available information.
You would think so.
Yeah, you would think so.
You got what you guys don't also, what people don't really pay attention to in the background is not only did Kalinsky leave, but David Rosen and Hayao Nakayama had also left. or at least they resigned from their positions and just kind of stuck around. What they tried to do, which was a weird, it was turned out to be probably the second worst thing they did, was they brought in Bernie Stolar, who worked for Sony. So he had worked for Sony Entertainment.
I'm going to be on the fence with you on this one because it was kind of a dark time during that time, but he did push things through and get us to the next console.
Yeah, but
yeah,
well, let me and I don't and I want to get Rob's take because Rob did play Saturn, but he did that, but at the same time, he scorched earth some major some major partnerships and relationships to do that. I mean, yes, he got us to the Sega Dreamcast, but let me put it this way. Those of us who are on, what used to be forums, they were kind of like internet, like not IRC chat, but I can't remember, UUENet, where we did it. People who were in the know were well aware of the hatred that Working Designs Victor Ireland had for Bernie Stolar. And one of the reasons that the Saturn was the last system that Working Designs made, ported and localized Japanese games for, and went over to the PlayStation, is because Bernie Stolar. Stolar hated the idea of localizing Japanese games, and when he didn't like it on Sony, when he came over to Sega, he got in it. There was something that happened between him and Victor Ireland, and Ireland said, "Fuck you," and he went and started making games for PlayStation. So like, you never got.
You're fine, Dr. Game Love. You're absolutely fine, man.
You never got other games, like you never got Lunar the Eternal Blue for like the Dreamcast or anything like that. You never got, another Magic Knight Ray Earth. You never got those Game Arts games on the Dreamcast. So yeah, he wanted to kill the Saturn as soon as he got there. Because remember, he was very outright. He came in right away and said, "Guess what? Saturn's not our future." And that just whatever momentum Saturn did have when they dropped the price and brought out Sega Rally and all these games that started to kind of pull them up a little bit.
Well, here was the other problem. When he came in, he did a straight-up assessment, because I did my homework on this too. They had like 9 concurrent products running at the time, most of which were mostly defunct, but they're still supporting them. And he's like, okay, this doesn't make any sense, right? Because they're hemorrhaging money at this time. Their arcade sales are the only thing that's making them any money, and it's not compensating for the rest. And even those were starting to like decline. So he cut tons of things. Like 32X, Sega CD, etc., like Game Gear, all those got cut. He also started to cut the Saturn and said, and Sega was desperate around this time because they had no money. They needed something to make some income. So they needed to come up with a console, and they needed to come up with it very, very quickly. So they went through a couple of revisions and a couple of different competing hardware architectures to come up with what would eventually become the Dreamcast. Now, that was a co-product between Microsoft doing the operating system and Sega coming up with the hardware. I know Jim had alluded to a console that Microsoft worked with Sega on. Dreamcast is the one that they worked with them on.
Yeah.
I forget which version of Windows it was. I think it was CE. That was actually on there. That was the main operating system.
Yes and no. So again, and this is about the time when I started my gaming journalism career with Dreamcast HQ. I actually had conversations with Sega about this at E3. Oh, good night, Corge. The Windows CE turned out to be kind of a bust for them. not many developers ended up using Windows CE because it was bloated. It was Windows. It was trying to run Windows.
Of course, it was bloated. It was Windows. I thought it was a weird choice when they did it. But
Well,
it was the first time I'd seen like a more desktop focused operating system being used on a console. It's the only time on record I can think of that I've seen that really happen.
So if you look at and I have my, if you could see it, I have my import Dreamcast up on the wall, and I use my US Dreamcast as my main Dreamcast, although I have some import games. The import Japanese Dreamcast says designed for Windows CE. The US model says compatible with Windows CE. People didn't like using Windows CE, so Sega once again wrote kind of first-party internal libraries for third parties to use that didn't want to use Windows CE. The overwhelming bulk of Dreamcast games use Sega's kind of internal development tools, and a small handful of games actually use Windows CE.
So they actually came out the gate swinging with this console. They had, I want to say, close to 12 games, all of which were pretty much Rockstar games out the gate.
Mm-hmm.
Soul Calibur was probably my blue ribbon. Throughout the entire generation, I've never seen a game that looked as good out of this era as Soul Calibur did on the Dreamcast. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 was an amazing port and probably the best port to get of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 if you were into fighting games.
Yep.
There were tons of other games like Crazy Taxi.
Yep.
Choo Choo Rocket.
Choo Choo Rocket.
By the way,
Dance Studio number 5. I forget the
Space Channel 5.
Space Channel 5.
Yeah.
That's it. Yes, which was a quirky, weird dance game that looked like a lot of fun.
Wait.
Yep.
It was a rhythm game. It was
a rhythm game.
Just, and I could never get it because it used like a weird. To me, it was, and I'm terrible at rhythm games, period. But it seems like this one used kind of an illogical button mashing rhythm where didn't really seem like it was going with the music. But I don't know.
It was hard. It was hard. It was a little weird. But it was also, who had a big hand in that game was Michael Jackson.
Wasn't he? Did he appear in 2
for some reason?
Yes, he loved Sega. Man, he loved Sega.
So this was pretty much what I considered Sega's swan song. Now, again, this was kind of hindered greatly by Sega Japan making calls on what could be ported over and what couldn't be ported over. Also, the marketing budget that they were supposed to get never actually hit because Sega could never get enough money together, even during this, to be able to even fund being able to produce the system. Now,
and also, there was they were still in kind of figurative deficit with retailers as well. Like they had a lot of it was such a great system, and it was a great success, but I think it was its success was completely marred by the failure of the mishandling of the Saturn. I think that was they entered the Dreamcast entered the ring basically in the red.
Absolutely, it absolutely did. They had
to
regain retailer confidence and consumer confidence. Because there had been a series of just botched launches at this point. People had these monstrous add-ons for the Genesis. Most of these things weren't well supported, particularly the 32X, and then later on the Saturn, which had kind of a spotty reputation. People that found it loved it. And honestly, if you go back and you look at the Saturn library now versus then, it's actually got a really nice, tight librry.
I feel like the Saturn library
now
now
to get a lot of bloat.
Is better regarded by serious collectors. More so than the PlayStation or the.
It didn't have time to get any bloat. It wasn't out long enough.
Yeah, I guess it just has more respect and clout among. I honestly think the games look better, also, but it's just kind of me.
See, man,
yeah.
I'll see myself.
So don't
Seaman was a
forget-
quirky game, and again,
Seaman
this
was
was
wild.
Sega starting to do what Sega did best, which was to do and throw
Be weird.
crazy shit at the wall and let it ride. That's when Sega was always at its best. That's when they were at their best with the Genesis.
Don't forget.
It was again when they're at their best with the Dreamcast.
Yep. And don't forget you're forgetting some other major launch titles.
I'm
Sonic
sure I'm forgetting
Adventure.
tons of launch titles.
Sonic Adventure,
yeah,
launch titles
geez.
is fuzzy.
And NFL 2K. It launched with NFL 2K.
Yeah, they didn't have any online features on that for like a year though, because it wasn't one of those supposed to be one of the first titles to do online.
No, they were still working. They were still working on there, and don't forget too. One of the other things that happened, before the Dreamcast came out, which I call it. I didn't think it was as big a deal at the time, but of course, EA being as big as EA is now, EA backed out of developing for the Saturn or the Dreamcast.
Well,
and in
fact,
they
lost all those.
There was a reason for that.
Yeah,
and that's because they wanted to be the only exclusive provider
of
sports games, and Bernie had just bought a studio to do Sega sports games.
Yep.
And he's like, well, sure, you can be the only third-party sports game. And EA went, no, we want to be the only sports on the console. And he's like, we're not doing that.
I just spent $10 million on visual concept.
Actually, I think it exactly was $10 million. And he's like, that's not happening.
Yeah. Now, EA has a different version of the story. They say that Sega didn't give them the same kind of licensing deal, and EA at the time had invested money in 3DFX, and Sega was originally going to go with, believe it or not, 3DFX for their chips. Yes. They ended up going with NEC, and they ended up making the system in a Power VR, which they were like, they weren't very happy with. So those
were two of the competing architectures, and that was a
call
call by Sega of Japan, where they said, well, we like this one better, even though the 3DFX chip actually performed better.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle was the full truth of that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I honestly think Bernie probably would have given him whatever licensing deal he went. I kind of believe his side, just to get him on there, because more sports is more sports, and that's going to sell Dreamcast, right? Because it worked for the Genesis, it's probably going to work here. It would have worked there. Not that the 2K games were bad. The 2K game, what eventually became 2K Games, started out as Sega Sports.
Exactly.
For the record. And eventually that, and I want to say it was, I can't remember the name of the other company. Those two companies combined and became 2K Games. And that
they sold off, so Sega sold their assets off to Take-Two.
Yeah.
So that's where 2K Games is they were bought by Take-Two.
Yeah, there were like two companies that were making the sports games together for them, and they sold both of them off, and it became 2K. Like 2K Sports titles, which was under Take-Two.
Right. So the one thing that Stolar did do that I give him credit for was he got retailers back in, and he actually did a good job there, but they ended up firing him because, it wasn't. I don't know. I give him visual concepts, and I give him getting this thing on shelves, but he wasn't the greatest guy to deal with from a third party standpoint. And that's why Peter Moore took over. That's why they fired him. And Peter Moore was their senior vice president of marketing at the time, and he took over the launch. And that's where I first met Peter Moore.
Well, he was also the one that ended it all.
He did. He had no choice.
As it kind of wanted out, they weren't able to pull as much of a profit as they needed. Sega Japan was getting gun shy because the PlayStation 2 was on the horizon.
With a DVD player in it.
Yep, Microsoft was starting to pull out a little bit, and there were rumors of them coming out with a console as well.
Yep.
So you had two competing consoles in the game space that they had been pretty much dominating, and by dominating, I mean like absolutely crushing at this point. No games looked better at this era than Dreamcast. Dreamcast is where the games looked and played the best.
They lost a lot of money trying to drop the price, trying to I mean, they did a lot to try to make up because they needed. So back in the day, it's just wild. I remember Peter Moore. I was at E3. I was at Sega's kind of E3 party, and I remember Peter Moore hanging from this girder, going to the crowd. We're gonna kick Sony's ass, and the crowd, we're all going nuts. And by 2001, man, he just had no choice. They weren't
going to invest in the marketing. There was no marketing budget in the United States. It dried up about the time that he took over. He couldn't get any funding to try to promote it. PlayStation 2, tons of promotion. PlayStation 1 still had market domination, even over the Dreamcast, as most people had one. As a matter of fact, I think that thing sold like over 100 million units. PlayStation 1. The PlayStation 2 went on to be even more successful than that.
The most successful console in the history of consoles.
Yes. So around that time, they went to Sega Japan and said, doesn't make sense. Yeah. You guys should not be in console manufacturing. You should be doing what you do best, which is software. Yep. You need to go and develop third-party software and drop the idea of running a console. It's not feasible, and you will make your entire company bankrupt doing this. And that was pretty much the last nail in the coffin for Sega as a hardware manufacturer. Now, they've still done, Dr. Gamelop, a decent amount of software manufacturing over the years.
Yeah, but even that
is slowing down a little bit. Yakuza, I think, is still there.
Down. Because they bought Atlas and they bought those subsidiaries. Sega started when they dropped the Dreamcast. They started on what I like to call the 25-year spiral into hell. I mean, they couldn't bring out a good mainline Sonic to save their life, and in fact, Sonic game, the best Sonic game they've made in the last 20 years wasn't even made by Sega. It was made by it was made by somebody else.
Who made Generations? Because I thought Generations was really good.
I've heard good things about Generations and also Colors.
Those are okay, but Sonic Mania really was the Sonic game that a lot of us were waiting for, and that wasn't made by. It was published by Sega. Well, it was made by Christian Whitehead. I mean, it wasn't even made by their internal studios.
So I've got the ticker going for the question that we had on Twitter, because before we end tonight, which I kind of want to end here in probably 10 minutes or so. I feel like we should hit this. Where would Sega be now if they hadn't failed? Now, and let's define their failure here. I personally feel this rests with Sega of Japan and a number of bad calls that they made, and not killing off products when they should have likely needed to be killed off, which caused them to go into a downward spiral of financial debt they didn't need to do, along with a lot of public announcements and changes in launch philosophy that should not have been done, that led to them ultimately dying. Sega of America was always propping up Sega from the Genesis on. Make no mistake. Sega was always more popular in the United States and outside of Japan than it ever was in Japan, and they always considered to focus on Japan. So, exactly, where do you guys think they failed, and where do you think they'd be now if they hadn't?
That's a tough one, because like I'm trying to picture, like, if they hadn't have failed, there's no way the market would have supported four consoles during the GameCube, Xbox, PlayStation 2 era. That couldn't have happened. So I guess it could have happened, but I mean, it's unlikely that if all 4 companies brought consoles into that generation, that all 4 of them would have emerged on the other side successfully. So but also, I'm trying to think, well, then would Microsoft have even had room to get into the
I think
but
they
then they
could
also
edged
have
out
more
Microsoft.
financial clout behind them. It seems like when you're comparing a company like Sega, which is a game company, to a company like Microsoft or Sony, who are so much more than what they are as a game company. They got all kinds of, Sony's got their hand in everything. So it's
those divisions
I just don't
necessarily save money, share money, or communicate that.
Fair enough, but I mean, it's you're still talking about a multi-headed corporation, and then against this game developer. So I just, does that mean that the Xbox wouldn't have had room to come out? If it did, could Sony or Sega had stopped them? Like I don't know. I just, if Sega hadn't dropped out when they did, I don't know how much further they would have gone. I'm kind of curious. What do you think, though?
Mike, I'll let you go first. I'll go last here.
I think everything hinged on the 32X. Had the 32X not come out and the Saturn launched when it was supposed to, and that was the spiritual successor to the Sega Genesis, the fan base would have gone with it. You know, the fan base was already used to a system that didn't sport as many colors and didn't do the cool things that the Super Nintendo did, and that didn't really matter to them. The games mattered. And I think had they had stuck with the Saturn, got the Saturn out when it was supposed to be out, we might be looking at a different Dreamcast. We might be looking at a lot of different things. There was even a point in time when they turned to software that they were still kicking butt. When they sold Visual Concepts, when they sold off, some of their IPs, when they I don't know, they merged with Sammy. All these things, they're living off of right now. They're living off of games that really aren't their games per se. Yakuza, Persona, those are not their games. Those are Atlas's games, and I forgot the company that the development studio that makes Yakuza. Those aren't Sega's games. Sega doesn't make Sega's games anymore.
Monkey Ball.
Yeah, okay, so Monkey Ball is coming back. You're right about that.
Virtual Photos might come back.
Yeah, but we haven't seen anything on that yet. We haven't seen anything on that yet. I'm not holding my breath until I actually see something. Yeah. And I'm not talking about a remake of 5.
I think that was them testing the waters. I think that continues to kind of test well. I think it bodes well.
Yeah, they shut down their arcade business. I mean, this was a company that when that brought out games for the Xbox, for example, like Chrome Hounds and Full Auto, and and actually brought Phantasy Star Online to the Xbox. I mean, that's what they did. They don't do that anymore. So it's tough. It's a tough.
So here's my take on it. They could have done a couple of different things. This could have gone a couple of different ways. Had they partnered with Sony, came with them, could have had a Sony Dreamcast console. Sony and Sega could have been in partnership and probably done some serious damage to Nintendo. That have kept Microsoft out of the market? Maybe not. But I think if they had continued to do a couple things. 1, that partnership was one option. 2, keep up the marketing push through the Saturn and release the Saturn on time like it was supposed to. One of the things they did during the Saturn is they went more of a Japanese route with the marketing and removed the Sega Screen campaign and all that heavy push in advertising in the United States. So the Saturn was under-marketed. And then by the time they got to the Dreamcast, they had no budget for marketing when they wanted to ramp up marketing again, realizing that marketing was important. So had they kept that pressure up and had not released the 32X like you're talking about, kept the advertising up, pushed with the Saturn, and then potentially worked with Sony on upcoming consoles, could have had a console that was a combination of Sony and Sega on the market, which would have been a huge force because Sony was very good at acquiring people and getting people to bring IPs over and coming out with their own IPs in the end. You had Sega's own unique spin of IPs and their idea of basically being able to throw everything at the wall and being able to go for gusto. And you have a huge combined amount of knowledge there that could have rivaled anything on the market today and could have vastly shaken up the way the market looks and feels today with as much gusto as they did during the Genesis era for shaking up that market. Because make no mistake, the Genesis completely changed the face of gaming when it came out. Bar none.
Yes, it did.
It changed the aiming range. It changed the type of games that were played and the ones that were popular and set up the groundwork for all sorts of sports games moving forward. Continued to put that pressure on all the way through into the Dreamcast. They were a huge contributor in how the market looks today, any way you look at it. And with that kind of forethought, particularly from Sega of America and Sony's know-how on hardware, you've got a really, really, really dangerous combination.
Well, I see it a little differently. I kind of, and I know this isn't really one of these companies' styles, but to me, it made more logical sense for Sega to team up with Nintendo, and in a way they kind of sort of did, even though they both had a hand in making these companies that are effectively taking their lunch money. Like the GameCube was like a dark time for Nintendo.
That's a beautiful system, though.
Yeah,
the
sure
system
is.
deserved to do way better than it did. It was designed brilliantly.
And there was a time where I've heard it said that the GameCube was almost kind of a Dreamcast 2, in spirit, because that is where it seems like a lot of Sega's brighter ideas was to the GameCube. Anyway, it is, if Nintendo and Sega had actually teamed up, I think that would have been more, I guess, apropos, fighting off the two newcomers that were causing all the problems. So
I could see that. I could see that happening too. I could see that working out because as the market got more crowded, I could see them pulling resources and trying to come together at some point.
I just can't imagine Nintendo partnering up with anyone, really.
No, they didn't like partnering with people.
No,
I don't know if they really do now.
I still don't think that they do.
Which is fair. I mean, they have their own thing.
They have their own niche. They know their niche. They know their market, and they sell to that market. And I've made this contention: if you buy Nintendo systems or anything other than first-party Nintendo games, and the occasional good third-party games that come out for it, then why did you buy it? Right? There's plenty of places to play third-party games. There's multiple consoles for that. You go to Nintendo for Nintendo. Buy Nintendo.
Now, the last thing I'll say was, bar none, there has been no console launch lineup like the Dreamcast.
There is not. It goes down in my mind as probably the best launch lineup of all time.
It is, and
I was trying to find a list of those games. I think I found it.
There was like 12 or 15 games, and
they were 18.
They were all
18?
amazing.
18.
So, Mike, let me know if this is it. We got Power Stone. Was that a launch game?
Power Stone was a launch game.
I can't believe
Mortal
Power Stone was a
Kombat
launch
Gold.
game.
Soul
Mortal
Calibur.
Kombat Gold. Yep.
Sonic Adventure.
Yep.
Expendable. Blue Stinger.
Yep.
Blue Stinger's not bad. Not my favorite game, but not bad.
Not too bad.
Trick Style. Hydra Thunder. Hydra Thunder is one of the big ones, right?
Yep.
Mhm.
One of
Tokyo
my
I was a
Street
huge
Racer,
Midway racer at the time.
Flag to Flag,
Yep. Kart
Don't
racing.
remember Flag to Flag.
Flag-
but-
it
Monaco
was a-
Grand Prix 2, Pen.
Mhm.
Did this come out in the
Pen
States?
Triathlon.
Did that come out in the States?
Yep.
Okay. Yep. TNN Motorsports Hardware and House of the Dead 2, Air Force Delta, Aero Wings, NFL,
Was that Air Force Delta?
NFL 2K.
Yep. Yep.
What
There
were
were
you
at
asking?
least 5 or 6 of those that I owned.
Is Ready to
Pretty
Rumble
close
on that
to
list?
And NFL Blitz, Ready to Rumble. And that was last.
Ready to
Okay.
Rumble Boxing was such a cool game.
Yes. Yeah, you got it. That's the launch
Sweet.
lineup.
Glad I found. I don't know why that was moderately more easy to find than the list of Saturn launch
Right.
games.
And that was a
I thought
large
Choo
list
Choo
of
Rocket,
very titles. I think
Choo
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 Choo Rocket came out
Rocket,
a
I
little
thought
later.
was a launch game. When the Dreamcast came out, I was working at a call center, and my account was the, I don't know if you guys know this, Mars Music. I think it's dead now, but I think it was a competitor
Yes.
for Guitar Center.
Guitar Center, yeah. I used to
And the-
shop at Mars Music.
I did too when I lived in Texas. And the account behind us was the Sega Dreamcast account. And I don't know what kind of calls they took, but they were taking inbound calls from Sega customers. I don't know if there was some kind of tech support, if they were just shopping, but heard a lot about the Dreamcast at that time.
Yeah. Did you include Arrow Wings? Did I miss Arrow Wings?
Yes.
Okay. All right, you did say that.
Yeah,
that was
it's-
under shooters, right?
It's a massive,
It was a,
massive
uh,
launch lineup.
It was a air combat game.
And a
Yes,
lot
it was-
of those
it's under
probably need a
simulation.
revisit.
Yeah.
The list I found broke it down by genre. So that's.
Yeah.
So we're running a little over 2 hours, guys. Any last thoughts?
I'm not surprised because we had Mike on here, and this was his probably favorite subject.
Yes. Oh, we could easily do another hour on
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
So
We
could do like a
I
part two.
kept things a little short intentionally because we were starting to run short on time.
You know, we can spend a whole time talking about Sega games and their, first party games and their impact. That could be a future episode.
That we could do that for like almost any console. You could do that with Sony. You could do that with Microsoft. So,
Yeah, but I
we
can
can
only
do
do
it
it
with
with
all of
Sega.
But he
I
wants
can
to do
only
it with Sega, is what he's saying.
I'm not saying
You
we
don't-
don't
you
do
just
it with
wanna do it with
Sega.
those consoles.
I'm saying that's multiple episodes with multiple different developers.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
I see what Mike. I see what Nick is saying. Okay.
No, I know what he's saying. I'm getting a little
I have
tired.
no problem doing that with Sega.
No.
Not
I'm
at all, by the way.
I'm just. busting
I'm
your
not a
chops.
Sega hater. I have plenty of other consoles and love plenty of other stuff. We didn't even go into Game Gear, and Game Gear was phenomenal.
It was okay.
Game Gear was phenomenal.
We talked about the Game Gear. I feel kind of at length during our.
Yeah, we did that during the handheld
Yeah.
one. Yeah,
We did.
so we gave Game Gear some love.
Yeah,
We
a little
did.
bit.
We did.
So last
Well-
thoughts, Rob?
No, I don't have any. I think I expelled all my thoughts. So
Mike.
No, I've talked for probably an hour and a half of this 2-hour show, so I'm good.
Yeah, I'd love this kind of trip down memory lane. What I'd like to see, but I'd like to see Sega come back in some way, in some form, some fashion, either as a really good software developer or as a hardware developer. Absolutely. I don't think we'll ever see them make another hardware console. I would like to at
That
least see
ship is
them get some of their franchises back on track and come back as a software developer. at
And
bare
no,
minimum.
mini Game Gears don't count, guys.
yeah, those
No.
stupid little things.
Yeah.
I was really excited for that when I first saw it. Then when I saw they split it into 4 mini handhelds and how tiny
And-
they were, I was out. I was
And
absolutely
also, I
out.
think stupidly expensive, even by Japan
Yeah,
standards.
they were like $20 or $30 a piece. By the time you bought all of them,
And they
you
were
were spending
like
like
that
$130 or
big.
something.
You could only get it in Japan.
Yeah, it was
They're
ridiculous.
impractically small, like half the size of a Game Boy Micro. Come on. know
Yeah,
what you're
I mean
thinking.
they were basically they attached to keychains and they were like an
Mhm.
accessory for a keychain. It was dumb. So if they stop doing dumb ideas like that and start giving people more things like they want, I would like to see them come back as at least a software developer.
See, and honestly, I thought that the Sega Genesis Mini was a really good step in the right direction of kind of reminding people about these. Not that there's been any shortage of Genesis compilations since the Genesis. Honestly, jeez,
Yeah.
they've had some kind of Genesis compilation every generation since then. But
Hey,
I thought the Genesis menu was fantastic, and they could have
Yeah.
continued that at least along those lines, especially when people have been clamoring for more of Nintendo's mini consoles, and Nintendo's like, nah. So
we got Smash
seems like-
JT in the house.
what's
I haven't
up,
seen
Smash
Smash in a
Yeah.
while. What's up, man?
And right when we're leaving.
Right when
Yeah,
we're about
we're
to
out.
end.
Yeah.
That was my bedtime story. It
Nice.
seems like they could have, given us some kind of Saturn something. That's what fans want. It. Why not take their
Yeah.
money?
A Saturn Mini, a Dreamcast Mini, both. Any one of those would be great.
Or even
assuming
like-
you could get the emulation right.
Even like collector's sets, like Konami's been putting out all their games on collector's anniversary collections and stuff. Do something like that. How hard is that? Must be hard if they would have done it, but
Yeah, very hard.
whatever.
So,
It's an easy
All
idea
right.
to have, though. I don't know why they. can't
Yeah,
do
I
it.
feel like it's something that should definitely entertain, and then maybe move forward with some of the IPs that they feel are performing better out of those collections if they can collect that data. But I think Mike is falling asleep. I have work in like less than an hour, so I got to chill for a little bit and like decompress before I go right back into work.
All right.
The
All
Wii U
right.
tonight with the
Great.
fam, pumping up for the Miko. Absolutely, man.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So.
Wii U is definitely underrated. I feel like that's a very underrated Nintendo console. I don't feel like that one got the fair shake it deserved, and there's reasons for that. And a lot of people like to give it crap, and I don't necessarily agree with that. It gets some of the hate's deserved, most of it's not. But
But that's a story for another episode.
just another story
Yeah.
for another episode. Absolutely. All right, guys. Thank you, everybody who tuned in tonight. It's been an awesome podcast.
Yeah, it has.
Rob, Mike, always a pleasure hanging out with you guys.
Yeah, this is good.
Likewise.
Yep. Till next time, guys. Be
Good night.
Play on, gamers.